All right, let's get into it. Number 10, the organic sword. In 2004, forensic archaeologists excavating a 13th century burial site in the Carpathian Basin uncovered a sword that had no business existing. The blade itself was unremarkable, a standard single-edged iron construction consistent with Hungarian military equipment of the 1220s. But running along the fuller groove, the central channel carved into the flat of the blade, was a continuous strip of organic tissue. It was not decorative. It was not applied after the fact. Carbon dating placed it as contemporary with the sword itself, somewhere between 1220 and 1260 CE. The Hungarian National Museum in Budapest took custody of the artifact and commissioned a materials analysis. Researchers identified the tissue as processed sinew, running 61 centimeters along the fuller, fused into the iron at what appeared to be the molecular level. Traces of human blood proteins were detected within the tissue itself. The sword had not been decorated with biological material. It had been forged with it, a distinction that changes everything about what this object represents and what its maker must have known. Here is the anomaly that makes this artifact so unsettling. The forging of iron requires sustained temperatures above 1,200 degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, any organic tissue, sinew, skin, bone, or blood would incinerate completely before it could bond with metal. There is no documented medieval metallurgical process that accounts for what was found inside this blade. The tissue did not burn. It did not carbonize. It integrated. The mechanism by which this was achieved remains, according to the museum's own preliminary findings published in 2006, entirely without precedent. Researchers proposed several explanations. Perhaps the tissue was introduced at a lower temperature phase of the forging process. Perhaps a now-lost technique allowed organic material to be protected during heat treatment. Perhaps the blood proteins present acted as a bonding agent of some kind, a hypothesis that has no parallel in the archaeological record. Each theory creates more questions than it resolves, because the temperatures required to shape iron simply do not permit biological survival. The tissue is there anyway, preserved and fused, as if the laws of materials science briefly looked the other way. The sword is held in restricted storage at the Hungarian National Museum, accessible only to credentialed researchers. What is known is that someone in 13th century Central Europe performed a feat of metalworking that modern materials science cannot replicate or explain. If that smith possessed a method that has since been completely lost to history, the question that follows is a chilling one. What else did they know? Number 9. The giant relic. In 1991, workers carrying out renovation work at the Cattedrale di San Gennaro in Naples broke through a section of damaged flooring in the crypt and discovered a sealed reliquary chamber that had not been opened since a documented closure recorded in cathedral administrative records, dated 1389. Inside the chamber was a lead-lined box wrapped in deteriorating Byzantine silk. Inside the box was a single human femur. It measured 58.4 centimeters in length, roughly 30% longer than the maximum ever recorded in any modern or historical skeletal database. For context, the average adult male femur measures between 45 and 48 centimeters. The longest reliably recorded human femur in medical literature reaches approximately 51 centimeters, belonging to individuals of exceptional height. A femur of 58.4 centimeters implies a living individual standing somewhere between 2.7 and 2.9 meters tall. Carbon dating placed the bone in the 11th to 12th century CE. The bone was not fragile, not deformed, and showed none of the characteristic stress fractures associated with pathological gigantism, the condition that produces abnormal skeletal growth in modern medicine. This is where the official record becomes cryptic. Pathological gigantism, caused by excess growth hormone from a pituitary tumor, does produce individuals of extraordinary height, but it also produces bones that are structurally compromised. They bend. They fracture under load. They show clear signs of the hormonal disruption that caused them. The femur found beneath San Gennaro showed none of these markers. It was proportional, dense, and structurally sound, the bone of something very large that was, by all available evidence, built to be that way. The Vatican's Congregation for the Causes of Saints, the body with jurisdiction over relics, reviewed the Naples findings in 1993 and restricted further access to the analysis. No formal publication of the results was authorized. The cathedral's own records from 1389 describe the chamber's contents only as a relic of great significance, not to be disturbed. No name, no attribution, no explanation of origin. The church that sealed this chamber 6 centuries ago apparently did not feel the need to say what it was sealing away, or why. The femur remains in Naples, its access controlled, its full analysis unpublished. A bone of this proportion, structurally healthy, carbon dated to the medieval period, and sealed away by institutional authority, is a profoundly macabre puzzle. Whoever this individual was, the church decided in 1389 that the world was better off not knowing. Whatever they knew then, the Vatican has chosen, more than once, to keep knowing it alone. Number 8. The Cursed Helmet. In 1863, the Germanisches National Museum in Nuremberg, one of Germany's foremost institutions of cultural history, received an anonymous donation. The object was a 14th century iron helmet, constructed with cheek guards and a nasal bar consistent with Central European military equipment of approximately 1340 to 1370 CE. It arrived with a handwritten note in Middle High German, authenticated by philologist Ernst Wilhelm Fürstemann, as consistent with 15th century composition. The note stated plainly that every man who had worn the helmet had died violently within a year, and that the donor could no longer keep it in good conscience. The museum cataloged it with the detached skepticism appropriate to a serious institution receiving an object accompanied by a superstitious claim. The curator who processed the intake, a museum records administrator named Karl Dieter Schnell, died in a stabbing incident in Nuremberg 11 months later. His death is recorded in municipal records for 1864. Museum staff noted the coincidence privately. No formal connection was drawn. The helmet was placed in a display case, and the note was archived separately, cataloged as a curiosity rather than a warning. The provenance documentation accompanying the helmet traced it through 4 recorded owners between 1412 and 1748. Each died violently. A Bavarian knight killed in a skirmish. A merchant found stabbed. A minor nobleman dead in a fall that witnesses described as inexplicable given the height involved. A soldier who never returned from a campaign. He should have survived. The pattern was noted by a researcher at the museum in 1921 who published a short monograph on the helmet's history. He died in an accident the following year. The monograph was not widely circulated. In 1978, metallurgists granted access to the helmet's interior lining discovered something unexpected. Trace compounds of arsenic and antimony were embedded in the metal of the inner surface, at concentrations that, when combined with the heat and moisture of sustained wear, could theoretically be absorbed through the skin. Both compounds are contact poisons with documented use in historical assassination cases. The concentrations found were debated as sufficient to cause death, but sufficient to cause cumulative neurological damage and deterioration in an individual who wore the helmet regularly over months was considered plausible by the examining chemists. The helmet was removed from public display in 1961 and placed in restricted archive storage, where it remains. The arsenic hypothesis is the most rational explanation available, and it is a deeply foreboding one. It means someone in 14th century Germany engineered a helmet designed to slowly destroy the person wearing it. It was built to look like protection. It was built to kill. The museum intends to keep it sealed away. Given its history, that seems like the correct decision. Number 7. The Plague Doll. In 1985, workers demolishing a 14th century merchant's dwelling in Gloucester, England broke through an interior wall and found a cavity that had clearly been mortared shut with deliberate care. Inside the cavity was a cloth effigy approximately 30 centimeters tall. It was stuffed with human hair, 12 milk teeth, 7 iron pins bent into hook shapes, and fragments of 3 human finger bones, later identified through analysis by the University of Bristol's Department of Archaeology as phalanges from the hand. Dendrochronology placed the sealing of the cavity at 1348 to 1350 CE, the years of the Black Death's first devastating passage through Gloucester. Medieval sympathetic magic is documented extensively enough to have its own academic literature. The Latin translation of the Arabic text known as the Picatrix, completed around 1256 CE at the court of Alfonso X of Castile, describes in considerable detail the construction of effigies designed to transfer afflictions between individuals, using components taken directly from the body of the intended victim or a sacrificial substitute. The Gloucester doll matches this template with an accuracy that is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Someone in 14th century Gloucester knew this tradition and applied it with precision. The University of Bristol's 1987 analysis produced a finding that changed the nature of the object entirely. DNA extracted from the hair inside the effigy was compared against skeletal remains discovered beneath the floor of the same building during the same demolition. The remains were those of a child, aged approximately 6 to 8 years old. The DNA matched. The child's skeleton showed no signs of plague. It showed clear evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull, pre-mortem, deliberate. The doll had been built from the child's own body parts and sealed inside the wall of the house where the child was buried. Parish records for Gloucester show that the Black Death killed approximately 40% of the city's population between 1348 and 1350. The merchant who owned this dwelling is recorded in those same parish records as having survived the outbreak. He was one of the notable exceptions in a neighborhood otherwise devastated. He continued trading until his recorded death in 1371, apparently in good health throughout the decades of plague that periodically returned to the region. No record suggests he was ever questioned about the child. No record suggests anyone looked. The Gloucester doll sits now in archive storage at the University of Bristol, accessible to researchers under controlled conditions. What the official record will not commit to in plain language is the chain of implication. A child was killed. Components of that child's body were used to construct a ritual object designed, according to the best available historical parallel, to deflect death onto someone else. The merchant lived when everyone around him died. Somewhere in Gloucester, the bones of a child are still waiting for an explanation that no historian has yet been willing to put in writing. Number 6. The Bone Dragon. In 1977, a team of paleontologists assisting with excavations near Wawel Hill in Krakow, Poland, the site of Wawel Castle and Cathedral, the residence of Polish monarchs for centuries, discovered a collapsed medieval storage vault beneath the castle's eastern foundation. Inside the vault was a structure that should not have been there. Roughly 4 meters in length, it had been assembled from bones, pinned together with iron wire dated to the 13th or 14th century, and coated in a hardened resinous compound. It had a recognizable skull, an articulated spine, 4 limb structures. It matched no species in the vertebrate record. Zoologists from the Jagiellonian University Institute of Zoology in Krakow conducted the primary analysis, publishing limited findings in 1981. They identified bones from at least 14 distinct species within the composite structure, including horse, aurochs, large canine, and, most disturbingly, human. Integrated into the spine were several vertebrae subsequently identified as cetacean, belonging to a whale or large dolphin. Krakow is approximately 300 kilometers from the nearest coastline. In the 13th century, cetacean anatomy was not documented in any known Polish text. Someone had sourced whale bones from a very long distance and built them deliberately into this structure's backbone. The dragon legend of Wawel Hill is one of the oldest documented in Polish history. The chronicler Wincenty Kadłubek, Bishop of Krakow, and author of the Chronica Paulinorum, written between approximately 1190 and 1205 CE, recorded the story of the Wawel dragon as historical fact, describing a creature that had terrorized the region before being killed by a cobbler's trick involving a sulfur-stuffed sheep. What was found beneath the castle in 1977 was not a fossil. It was not a natural accumulation. It was a constructed object, assembled by human hands, from bones sourced from multiple continents, shaped into a form that matched the creature Kadłubek had described 8 centuries earlier. The assembly demonstrated something that the Jagiellonian University report noted with evident discomfort. The bones had been positioned with anatomical precision, not decoratively arranged, but structurally organized as if the builder understood how a 4-limbed vertebrate moved and was attempting to recreate that function in a new form. The proportions were internally consistent. The limb-to-spine ratios corresponded to a body plan that, had it existed, would have been capable of weight-bearing locomotion. This was not a sculpture. It was closer to a reconstruction. Further publication of the findings was discouraged by the Polish Ministry of Culture, and the assembled structure was placed in restricted institutional storage. What remains in the public record is the Jagiellonian University's 1981 summary and the undeniable fact of what was found. Someone in medieval Krakow built a dragon from real bones sourced across a continent, with a precision that required knowledge they had no documented source for. Someone else decided the world should not know it existed. Both of those decisions demand an explanation that has never been provided. Number 5. The Living Statue. In 1239, the Cistercian monastery of Pontigny in Burgundy, one of the oldest and most significant Cistercian houses in France, received a carved oak statue of the Virgin Mary, transported from an unspecified location in the Byzantine Empire. The object was installed in the monastery's Lady Chapel and recorded in the abbey's administrative register as a gift of uncertain provenance. Within 6 months of its installation, 4 monks submitted individual written confessions to the abbot, independently of one another, reporting the same experience. The statue's eyes had moved. Its mouth had opened. It had spoken to each of them in a language none of them recognized. The 4 testimonies survive in partial transcription. The medieval historian Dom Jean Leclerc, the Benedictine scholar whose work on monastic culture defined the field in the 20th century, referenced these documents in a 1957 survey of Pontigny's archive, describing them as among the more unusual items in an exceptionally well-preserved collection. Each monk used the Latin phrase lingua ignota, unknown tongue, to describe what they heard. This is the same phrase Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century abbess and mystic, used to describe her own constructed sacred language, a system of communication she claimed was revealed to her from a non-human source. In 1987, art conservators conducting an inspection of the statue discovered that its interior was hollow in a manner inconsistent with normal medieval carving practice. A sealed cavity ran through the figure's torso. Inside the cavity was a rolled vellum document written in Greek uncial script. Paleographic analysis dated the document to the 11th century CE, at least 150 years before the statue arrived at Pontigny. The document had been placed inside the statue during its original construction, not added later. It was not a relic. It was not a prayer. A partial translation suggested it was a set of instructions specifying particular vocal frequencies to be directed at the figure in sequence. The contents of the document were conveyed to the Vatican following the conservator's report. The statue was removed from Pontigny in 1991 and transferred to the Vatican museums, where it is held in restricted storage and not publicly exhibited. The partial translation has not been officially released. What the conservators documented before access was restricted is this. Someone built a hollow statue in the 11th century, inserted into it a set of operational instructions written in Greek, and then transported it to a Cistercian monastery in France, where it apparently began functioning according to those instructions within months of arrival. 4 monks in 13th century Burgundy heard a wooden statue speak in a language that had no name. The instructions for producing that effect are written on a document now locked inside a Vatican archive. The statue itself has not been seen publicly in over 3 decades. Medieval craftsmanship is capable of extraordinary things, but a statue built with a technical manual inside it, producing repeatable experiences across 4 independent witnesses, operating according to a mechanism its makers encoded in writing, is something that the word craftsmanship does not fully account for. What exactly was it designed to say? Number 4. The Heart Idol. During restoration work at Bamberg Cathedral in Bavaria in 1961, workers removing a damaged section of the crypt floor directly beneath the high altar discovered a sealed ceramic urn embedded in the foundation material. The urn was intact, its lid fixed with a dark resinous compound. Inside was a carved figurine approximately 12 centimeters tall, fashioned from polished black volcanic obsidian. It was shaped in the precise anatomical likeness of a human heart, not the stylized symbol that appears in medieval iconography, but an accurate representation including the aortic arch, the pulmonary arteries, and the distinct contours of the left and right ventricular walls. Nestled inside its carved chest cavity was a desiccated organic mass. It was a real human heart. Bamberg Cathedral was founded in 1004 by Holy Roman Emperor Henry II, who was canonized by Pope Eugene III in 1146. The cathedral contains Henry II's tomb and has been one of the most significant religious sites in Bavaria for over a millennium. The obsidian used to carve the figurine is not native to Bavaria. The nearest source deposits are in the Eger Rift in Bohemia, approximately 200 kilometers distant, or alternatively, the material may have been imported from Anatolian sources via trade networks. Either origin implies the figurine was produced by someone with access to rare imported materials and the skill to work them with extraordinary precision. The obsidian heart was examined in 1963 by cardiac specialists at the University of Würzburg, who assessed the figurine's anatomical accuracy. Their finding was unambiguous. The carving was consistent with direct anatomical observation of a dissected human heart. The pulmonary artery system is rendered correctly. The proportions of the chambers are accurate. The aortic arch curves in the right direction. The problem is that accurate depiction of the human cardiac anatomy, specifically the pulmonary vascular system, was not documented in European medical literature until Andreas Vesalius published his foundational work, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, in 1543. The figurine predates that publication by 4 centuries. Someone dissected a human heart, studied it carefully enough to reproduce it in obsidian with clinical accuracy, and did so at a time when the Church strictly prohibited dissection of human remains. The preserved heart found inside the figurine was carbon dated in 1998 to between 1050 and 1150 CE. DNA analysis identified it as male, aged approximately 35 to 45 years at death. The urn's exterior bore a Latin inscription reading Cor Regis in Manu Dei, drawn from Proverbs 21, verse 1. The heart of the king is in the hand of God. Bamberg Cathedral contains the tomb of a canonized emperor. The inscription names a king. The heart of an adult male was sealed beneath that emperor's altar at approximately the time of Henry II's death in 1024. The church has not commented on whose heart was found beneath the Bamberg altar. The figurine and its contents are held in restricted access within the cathedral's institutional archive. What the inscription asserts, what the carbon dating implies, and what the anatomically precise obsidian container was designed to hold in perfect preservation for 9 centuries are 3 things that, placed side by side, form a picture that no official body has chosen to address directly. The heart of the king is in the hand of God. Someone went to considerable trouble to make that literally true. Number 3. The Flesh Crown. In 1888, the French art historian and archaeologist Eugène Müntz led an excavation beneath the ruins of the Château de Coucy in Picardy, the largest private fortress ever constructed in medieval France. Within a sealed subfloor chamber that showed clear evidence of deliberate ritual use, Müntz's team recovered an object he described in his field notes as the most disturbing artifact I have encountered in 30 years of excavation. It was a circlet approximately 22 centimeters in diameter, sized to fit an adult human head. It was constructed entirely from tanned and hardened human skin, stitched together with sinew thread, and inlaid along its outer surface with human fingernails arranged in a precise decorative pattern. It had been worn. The interior surface bore the compression marks, scalp oil residue, and residual hair follicles, none matching the skin's original owners, of regular, extended use. The Château de Coucy was the seat of Enguerrand VII de Coucy, born in 1340 and died in 1397, widely documented in the chronicles of Jean Froissart as one of the most powerful and feared lords in 14th century France. Froissart, whose chronicles are among the primary sources for the period, describes Enguerrand in terms that make clear his contemporaries regarded him as operating outside the boundaries that constrained lesser men. He held enormous territorial power, commanded significant military forces, and was recorded as administering justice in ways that even his peers, men not known for squeamishness, found excessive. A 2023 DNA reanalysis conducted by researchers at the University of Paris-Cité examined the skin components of the circlet and identified genetic material from a minimum of 3 distinct individuals. All 3 donors were identified as adult males. The sinew used for stitching came from a 4th individual. The fingernails were sourced from at least 2 more. This object was assembled from the bodies of at least 6 people. Cross-referencing Froissart's chronicle with available Picard administrative records from the 1370s and 1380s, historians have noted that 3 documented enemies of Enguerrand VII disappeared without trial, execution record, or burial documentation between 1371 and 1389. No explanation for their disappearance appears in any surviving source. The crown is held at the Musée de Cluny in Paris, catalogued under the deliberately vague designation ceremonial object, origin uncertain, and is not publicly displayed. Müntz's original field notes and excavation report exist in the archive of the École des Beaux-Arts. The DNA analysis was published in a specialist forensic archaeology journal in 2023 and received almost no mainstream attention. There is a macabre bureaucratic neatness to the way this object has been handled across nearly 140 years, described precisely enough to be catalogued, and obscurely enough to avoid the question that sits at the center of every fact surrounding it. Number 2. The Iron Book. In 1886, the librarian of the Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland, one of the oldest continuously operating monastic libraries in the world, and a UNESCO World Heritage Site housing one of the finest collections of medieval manuscripts in existence, discovered a volume that appeared in none of the Abbey's catalogs. It was concealed behind a false panel in the manuscript vault. The book's covers were beaten iron. Its pages were vellum. Its binding was human skin, confirmed by the Abbey's own physician, Dr. Heinrich Vogel, who noted in his written assessment the characteristic pore pattern and follicle scarring that distinguish human dermis from animal hide. The text inside was written in a script that matched no known alphabet, then or since. Father Anselm Dietrich, the librarian who discovered the volume, documented its existence in his personal journal, now held in the Abbey's private archive. He describes his reaction in language that is striking for a man of his training and composure. He did not reach for theological explanation. He reached for a lock. The volume was restricted from the general collection within a year of its discovery. Carbon dating conducted in the 20th century placed the vellum pages and iron covers in the same production window, approximately 12 of 90 to 1340 CE. The book was not assembled from components of different eras. It was made as one object, bound in human skin from the beginning. In 1944, the United States Army Signal Intelligence Service, engaged in the greatest code-breaking effort in the history of warfare, received a sealed copy of the Iron Book's text through channels that remain partially classified. The analysis was assigned to William Friedman, the cryptographer who had broken the Japanese purple cipher and contributed decisively to the defeat of German Enigma variants, a man widely considered the finest codebreaker of the 20th century. Friedman spent 3 months on the Iron Book. His conclusion, declassified from the U.S. National Archives in 2001, stated that the text was not a substitution cipher, that it possessed detectable grammatical structure, that it was communicating something with internal logical consistency, and that he could not read it. Friedman had broken systems designed by nation-states with the full resources of modern cryptographic engineering. He walked away from a medieval manuscript without an answer, but not without a conclusion. The Iron Book was not random marks. It was language, structured, consistent, grammatically organized language, written in a script that no human civilization has been found to have used. The Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the body that was once the Inquisition, requested a sealed copy of Friedman's analysis through diplomatic channels in 1944. That request is documented in the U.S. National Archives declassification. What the Vatican wanted with a codebreaker's report on a medieval manuscript is not documented. Number 1. The Demon Skull. In 1923, workers engaged in drainage and excavation work beneath the ruins of Chateau Gaillard in Les Andelys, Normandy, the fortress built by Richard I of England between 1196 and 1198, uncovered a stone-sealed clay vessel at a depth of 14 meters within the castle's eastern well system. The vessel was an amphora, its limestone cap carved with a series of markings that matched no decorative tradition associated with the castle's construction period. Inside the vessel, preserved in a dense, amber-colored resin compound that had maintained a near-hermetic seal for an estimated 7 centuries, was a skull. It was human in its overall structural organization. It was not human in any other respect. The skull was transferred to the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris, where it was examined by Dr. René Verneau, the institution's foremost physical anthropologist and one of the most respected figures in European anatomical science in the early 20th century. Verneau had spent decades cataloging skeletal collections from across the colonial world and had produced foundational comparative analyses of Neanderthal specimens. He was not a man given to dramatic conclusions. His report, published in 1924, documented the skull's characteristics with the precision his reputation demanded, and arrived at a conclusion that he framed with evident discomfort. The cranial capacity measured 1,900 cubic centimeters. The human average is approximately 1,350 cubic centimeters. This alone would have placed the skull beyond any recorded human specimen. But the capacity was not the most aberrant feature. The orbital ridges above the eye sockets were pronounced to a degree that exceeded any documented human anatomical variant. The skull contained 36 teeth, with a third row of fully rooted molars positioned behind the standard dental arch, a configuration that has no parallel in the human fossil record. At the rear of the skull, bilateral bony projections rose symmetrically 3.4 centimeters from the occipital surface, smooth, fully developed, and structurally integrated into the bone. They had grown there. They were not pathological. They were not deformations. They were features, as deliberate and consistent as any other part of the skull's architecture. Verneau's published conclusion used 4 words that do not appear together elsewhere in his body of work. Origin unknown, not uncertain, not anomalous, unknown. He ruled out every known pathological condition that produces cranial abnormality. He ruled out every known fossil hominin whose remains had been cataloged by that point. He ruled out deliberate post-mortem modification. What he could not rule out, and what he stopped short of stating directly in print, was the implication that this skull belonged to something that had lived and breathed and died, that had been preserved with extraordinary care, sealed beneath the foundations of an English king's fortress, and that did not belong to any species he had a name for. In 1931, the skull was transferred to a private collection at the request of an unnamed buyer. The French Ministry of Cultural Affairs formally requested its return in 1978. The request was denied. The skull's current location is unknown. Whatever was entombed in resin beneath Chateau Gaillard in the 13th century, someone in the 20th century decided the same thing every custodian of this object has decided since 1923, that the rest of us are better off not seeing it. René Verneau was the finest anatomist of his generation, and he looked at that skull and ran out of categories. That is not a mystery. That is an answer. We simply have not yet decided what question it belongs to. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.